Once upon a time, I was heading to my friend's dacha, just an ordinary Friday after work. And by the evening, anticipating the taste of barbecue and beer, I was already speeding in my car along the highway from the city towards the dacha. It was not far, just 30 kilometers from the city, and I knew the road by heart, as if I could get there with my eyes closed. Nothing complicated, mostly a straight path, and only towards the end, I needed to turn towards the village of Grafsko, and from there it was a stone's throw. On this day there was rain with thunderstorms, and the road visibility was poor, so I was driving slower than usual. Getting into an accident was definitely not in my plans for today. Halfway through, I got stuck in traffic. Where could it have come from on the highway? After 2 hours of turtle-like movement, I saw the cause of the traffic jam: road repair. Well, as always, whenever I'm driving, there are always adventures, road repairs, accidents. Well, I'll have to find a detour. And how lucky. Right in front of the barriers set up by the workers, there is an exit to a dirt road and a sign indicating that on the other side is a bypass through the village. Hashem, the sign was so old that the name of the village was already unreadable. Well, maybe it's not all that bad, I thought. I'll be delayed for some more time, bypassing the repair works, and then I'll fly to my friends at full speed. As I turned off the road, I noticed that I was the only one daring to take the detour. All the other cars immediately turned around and headed back towards the city. It seemed strange. Perhaps they knew a shorter route? Oh well, I had already turned onto the dirt road, and turning back was not something I wanted to do. Of course, there were no streetlights on this road, and it looked like an old, rarely used path, especially with the heavy rain having eroded it significantly. Getting stuck in this mud and clay swamp was the last thing I needed. Driving was challenging, especially in my not-so-new sedan. And there, in the distance, the roofs of houses appeared. It was already past midnight, and the rain was intensifying, turning into a fine hail. Great, just what I needed. Continuing the journey in such weather was almost impossible, so I decided to call my friends, tell them I would only arrive by morning, and tried to spend the night in this village, hoping someone would offer me shelter. I took the phone in my hand. Of course, no signal. The 21st century and just a couple of kilometers off the main road, and it felt like stepping back into the Middle Ages. Okay, I hoped my buddies, in their drunken stupor, wouldn't start looking for me in the middle of the night and would simply fall asleep. By morning, I'd make my way to them. I pulled up to the first houses. Apparently, this village consisted literally of one road, along which small houses stood on either side. Speaking of the houses, they looked far from habitable. To say they were old would be an understatement. They were dilapidated, decrepit, overgrown with impenetrable thickets of some bushes. Not a single window showed any light. It didn't surprise me after all. It was late, and people were probably already asleep, if there were people here at all. Suddenly, lightning flashed, and I caught a glimpse of a silhouette on the road. It was tall, I would even say lanky, with arms that seemed longer than those of an ordinary person, and this figure was dressed in rags. In the moment of illumination after the lightning, it ran towards the nearest house to me. All of this happened in the blink of an eye. I thought, maybe due to poor visibility and fatigue, I imagined it as some kind of monster. It was undoubtedly a person seeking shelter from the hail and running home. I reassured myself. Great, so in this godforsaken place there were people, and I could negotiate for a place to stay. I really didn't want to get out of the car. The rain was so intense that even being outside for 30 seconds would leave you soaked to the bone. But there was no other option. Sleeping in the car was not an option at all. I pulled up as close as possible to the house where that person ran. I took a small bag with me, money just in case the owners asked for payment for staying the night, and gathering my strength, jumped out of the car. I ran towards the front door of the house, seeking shelter under the porch, soaked, instantly cold and damp. Well, the weather in early October was just something else. The porch I found myself under was leaking. But anyway, it was better than standing in the pouring rain. I knocked on the door. "Owners, is anyone home?" Silence. I knocked again. Nothing happened. I tried to open it, no luck. What to do? Running to another house would mean getting completely soaked and likely catching a cold. No, I didn't need that. Maybe I should go around the house, and there might be another door there? Worth investigating. With this plan in mind, I moved along the side of the house around the corner, glancing briefly through a window. For a moment it seemed like I saw some movement there. Somehow, through the impenetrable bushes, I reached the back of the house. The door was indeed there, leading to a garden. Although I wasn't sure those standing crosses were a garden. Wait, crosses. Where did crosses come from here? The backyard of this house more resembled an old cemetery than a garden. Something was not right. I didn't have time to contemplate what I saw because, with a wild creak, the door behind me opened. Without much thought, I dove inside. The door closed. Probably a draft. The house smelled musty, damp, and as if something was burning. Well, at least the rain was no longer a hindrance. I took my phone and turned on the flashlight, briefly noticing that it had only 15% battery left. I began to scan the room with the flashlight. Table, chair, mug, plates. I was in the kitchen. Here I remembered that I had essentially barged into the house uninvited, and I should at least let the owners know I was here. "Owners, can you accommodate a guest for the night? If needed, I can offer you some money for help." In response, there was only silence, and the sound of raindrops on the roof was the only thing breaking it. Well, if nobody is here, maybe I can spend the night unnoticed, and if the owners come, I'll explain everything politely. All right, I have a plan. I need to find at least a bed. I can't sleep on the floor. I definitely won't find a bed in the kitchen, so I need to make my way further inside the house. The floor creaked loudly under my steps. The atmosphere was mediocre. Night, an old house with its own graveyard in the backyard, creaky floors. All the horror movies flashed through my mind. A chill ran down my spine. I walked through the kitchen and found myself in a small room. Huge clocks hung on the wall, the ones that strike as many times as the current hour. They looked very old, and the clock hands seemed somewhat warped. In this room, I also noticed a table covered with some rags, stained with either dirt or something else. The room was in terrible condition. Wallpaper was peeling off the walls, the ceiling was streaked, and in general, the room looked eerie. On the floor lay smeared dry mud. Next to the table stood a spring bed. Its headboard was very rusty, suggesting that perhaps no one lived in this house at all. No one would sleep on such an old bed. Except for me. Sleep came unexpectedly. Well, after all, a lack of sleep for a whole work week, plus over 5 hours on the road. Indeed, these 30 kilometers to the dacha turned out to be much longer. Without much hesitation, realizing that this house was likely abandoned and the owners wouldn't come, I sat on the bed, not afraid that it might collapse, and I'd fall to the floor, breaking through the decayed boards and landing in the basement. I wondered if there was some kind of cellar here. All right, the bed didn't fall apart, a good sign. Using my backpack as a makeshift pillow, I closed my eyes and unknowingly fell asleep. The fear somehow completely disappeared. I woke up to a distant sound, as if someone was walking in the kitchen, and the floor creaked unpleasantly under the steps of the walker. Opening my eyes and trying to understand what I was doing here, I sat up on the bed and shouted, "Is anyone here?" The footsteps stopped. Clearly, someone was there. I got off the bed and went to the kitchen. No one. I turned on the flashlight on my phone. The floor was covered in fresh mud. What is going on? What dirty creature roams here at night? And where did it disappear to? Fears entangled my thoughts. Turning towards the exit from the kitchen, I saw a tall shadow flicker in the room. I rushed there. More mud. It led towards a small hatch on the floor. How did I not notice it when I entered this room? Well, should I crawl in there or forget it? I hadn't dealt with all this filth yet. Sat on the bed, contemplating what to do next. Sleeping was now unlikely, and I didn't want to run to the car I had just dried off, and the rain outside showed no signs of stopping. I needed to go and seek adventures on my own 2 feet. In my backpack, I felt my old Swiss knife, at least some form of weapon. Although if it was something otherworldly, it probably wouldn't help. Gathering courage, I approached the hatch. Open it? No. Why? But what if there's something interesting down there? Like a vampire, for example, that would be interesting. Well, I had to do something, right? Yes. After finishing the internal debate, I began to open the hatch. Its handle was in the mud and smelled so bad that I almost revisited my lunch. It smelled like carrion. This was beyond any limits. Well, since I already got dirty in this, I had to finish what I started. The hatch was open. I illuminated it with my phone. Wooden steps disappearing into the darkness, and nothing more visible. Great. Descending into the unknown. Then I noticed that my phone had only 5% battery left. All right, that meant I had to go down quickly, inspect, get rid of any filth, and go to sleep sounded like a plan. As soon as I leaned down to start descending, something pushed me from behind, and I tumbled down. Silence. Headache. I was lying on something hard and unpleasant. Feeling with my fingers, I realized it was porous and solid. Bone. It was a bone. Springing up instantly and shining my flashlight around, I discovered that the entire basement floor was littered with bones and human skulls. I was just paralyzed with fear. Where had I ended up? Who pushed me? How do I get out of here? While my thoughts sluggishly processed the impact in my head, something stirred in the corner. There was something sitting there, making chewing sounds. Suddenly the sound stopped, and it slowly rose, probably about 2.5 meters tall. Dry, elongated legs, arms below the knees, and claw-like fingers or talons, impossible to discern, a head. The head was unusually toothy. It looked as if it was a gnawed skull stretched out. I couldn't see any eyes, or maybe I just didn't notice them. This vampire-like creature lunged at me with a piercing scream. Dropping my phone, I managed to evade it somehow and fell. Get up. I need to get up, I mumbled to myself. Swiftly turning around, the creature pounced on me again. This time I couldn't parry in time, and its razor-sharp claw slashed across my chest. Pain pierced through my entire body, not just mine apparently. The creature, roaring, fell next to me. A Swiss knife stuck out from its chest. I needed to run, had to get out of here. I definitely didn't have a second knife. I leaped up and started climbing the stairs at full speed, grabbing my phone from the floor. Then I heard that the vampire got up and was already running towards me. With all the remaining strength, I climbed up the very steep steps, not realizing that under my feet and hands, the ground was filled with rotting carrion. Suddenly, I was pulled down by my leg. Thankfully, my boots had zippers instead of laces. Quickly unzipping it in one motion, I left my boot with that fiend and it fell down. Opening the hatch, it was already dawn outside. Swiftly, grabbing my backpack, I slammed into the entrance door with all my might, hoping to break it to pieces. Whether I weighed too little or had no strength left for a proper push, the door met me with a solid hit, and I flew backward. A bolt. There was a bolt on the door, damn me. Quickly getting up, I ran to the door, removed the bolt, and then behind me, I heard a disgusting breath. Without looking at what was behind, I opened the door, rushed out of the house, and ran to the car. The rain had already stopped, and a fog covered the ground. Sitting in the car, I instantly released the handbrake and drove away. Glancing in the rearview mirror, there, only an old cemetery was visible and no houses. And on the street, about 5 of those dreadful creatures stood, watching me. I eventually made it to the dacha. Seeing me in the morning, my friends were almost speechless. Dirty, covered in blood up to my chest from a deep cut, missing a boot, all disheveled. I told them everything. My friend looked at me with bewilderment and said, "There is no village there. It's just an ancient cemetery, and it appeared after." Wait, there was a village? but it burned down more than 100 years ago. Everyone who lived there died, and they buried all the villagers on the site of the burnt village. Well, I guess we'll go home by another road.